Good morning, everybody. Glad you're here today. And let's see. I need to hit this button, and that should get us going. Okay. So, if you could join our presentation. I have a question for us here in just a moment. I'm going to ask you a less serious question first, and then a more serious question following. The more serious question is, why do you enjoy this format? Or what is it about this format of doing Connection Point that you enjoy? I have been getting positive feedback about the format. I just am interested in what is it about the format that you find as positive. Okay, so here's the question. What color is the dress? Is it black and gold, white and gold, black and blue? So the laughter tells me that perhaps some of you have heard this, seen this before. Is it just me, or does the picture back there look significantly different than the picture up here? Looky there. I thought at first that we would just have a binary. We actually have one black and gold. When I first saw this, I thought it was a joke because what's the question? I see the color. And then it turns out that it's not a joke. People's eyes actually see different things. It's not like that black and white picture, is this a beautiful young girl or is it an old lady, where you can actually, so they're both there, and then you can flip in your mind this. It seems like either you see it or you don't. Now, somebody said that the actual dress was confirmed to be black and blue, but it looks gold and blue to me. Light blue and gold. I'm like, okay. Now, this is I suppose, a contrasting example. That is that there's something structural about our brains and our eyes and how we process light waves. We know about color blindness. And color blindness isn't a choice of the person. It's a function of the structure of how their brain and eyes are working together. Okay. On the other hand, how we look at and think about issues, well, I don't know. How much like this is that, and how much unlike this is that? What I remember the shock. There aren't very many moments in my life of the shock of recognition that I experienced this day, but I can still feel it. I have this picture imprinted in my head. I was sitting in my office at Bob Jones. I was a Greek teacher, and I heard in my buddy's office the next door over them talking. I recognized the voices. It was Brian Smith. He's also a Greek teacher. It was Ken Casillas. He was a year ahead of us in the Old Testament PhD program. And I had just been reading in my Greek Testament in the book of Acts, Acts 15. And in Acts 15, verses 8 and 9, it says, Peter is recounting the story of Cornelius to the Jerusalem council. And he says that God purified their hearts by faith, even as he did ours. And, I'm not reading an English version. I'm reading the Greek text. And it was just so clear to me, so unmistakably, unavoidably clear that the text was saying that what happened at Pentecost involved heart purification. And, I'm thinking within the framework of my Wesleyan theological frame. And so I just got up and I walked around to the next office and stood in the doorway and said, hey guys, I was just reading Acts 15:9. Let me read it to you. How is it that this can't be what I understand it to be? And, I'd kind of interrupted their conversation. And I remember Ken just kind of looking at me with this, what are you talking about? Look on his face. And he said, well, people have their hearts purified when they get saved. And in that moment, I suddenly had a new perspective, not necessarily that I agreed with, but I never would have arrived at that particular perspective on my own. And he was wondering where in the world I was coming from with the perspective I had. Now, it's not that I chose to have a perspective that excluded their viewpoint, so much as I grew up in a church that taught something. I was trained in a Bible college that taught something. I had glasses on that were Wesleyan in their theological framing. So, I think that this is an opportunity for us to ask on the things that we want to have conversations or are willing to have conversations with people about. How do we discover when we have glasses on our face that we didn't know we had on? So that's my little opening story. I'd like to hear, have you discovered that you had glasses that you didn't know that you had on? And what did you learn that could be passed on to someone else about how to see your unconscious framing of what you see in life? Did I make the question clear enough? Okay, you're thinking. That's good. Hang on a second. How many of you are thinking of something specific? You say, yeah, okay, I can. Okay, Charlotte, Matt, Randy had his hand up. Anybody, is that a hand? That's not a hand. Are you willing to share, Matt?
Sure. I remember in college running a across somebody who was passionate about speaking in tongues. And I was like, oh, easy answer. I've learned about this my whole life. It's all fake. It's all this. It's all, like, it's not a real thing. It's gibberish. It's whatever. And then I go to your dad and talk to him about it. And I go to a bunch of other Christians that I, respect that are, wiser than me. And even your dad was like, I know people who speak in tongues. And I was like, okay, this is weird. Like, what is going on? I've learned one thing my whole life. And then when your dad told me that, I was like, I don't even know what to think about this subject anymore. It's the weirdest thing. Because your dad was just like, just because we do it, doesn't mean, other people don't do it. I mean, I watched a Mark Lowry comedy video the other day, and he was talking about, Baptists, growing up Baptists, and he was like, oh yeah, I know all these Pentecostal people, they pray for healing and everything, and they get saved. I'm a Baptist, I pray for people and they die. It's just, so I don't know, I think it's just, those two things might not totally connect, but I think you understand the point I'm making.
Yeah, okay, good.
Well, so kudos to you for going to ask. And I appreciate the shock of suddenly hearing something that you had thought differently. Charlotte, what was your thought?
When I attended Cincinnati Christian and their take on baptism and how strong they were that you needed to be baptized or heaven was not, and we'd go back and forth. I respected what they had to say, but there was just that little difference on baptism, and I had never heard that before.
Good. Randy?
So there was one yesterday. This was a case where standing in a presentation, and the guy who's doing the presentation was standing in front of the PowerPoint slide enough that I missed a key piece of information that completely changed the prioritization of the scenario that was being presented. Like, oh, yeah, that makes a difference. So, as I heard you talking, what I was thinking about was instead of new glasses, of blinders, and at times our vision gets broadened. A second one, many years ago, I remember reading books by an author, and how I don't understand how this author who exhibits these practices can also be exhibiting this deep of a relationship with God.
Okay. Yeah, how can you have a profound relationship with God and do X, Y, or Z? Yeah. Now, so what is it? I guess I can say it this way. All of us acknowledge that we wear glasses to some extent. I mean, we've intentionally chosen, you're here. You're not somewhere else. The fact that you're here is a choice, right? And the difficulty seems to be that it's what we don't realize about what we're choosing that makes it difficult to hear another person who's disagreeing. Like, for example, I'm reading this book, again, Winsome Conviction, Disagreement or Disagreeing Without Dividing the Church. And the two authors tell a story of bringing together two professors, one who was a convinced, both Christians, one convinced that evolution is true and that this is how God formed the world. The other one convinced that Genesis 1 should be read literally, and having them try to talk to each other. And I'll tell you how that story wound up in just a minute. But the author uses the story to point out that when we encounter people different from us, we often do two things and not often a third. The first is that we categorize. Where does this person fit in my overall schema of the world? Okay. And then we characterize. And we characterize sometimes in terms of intelligence, other times in terms of motivations, right? But the third thing that's not often done is that some people engage with the person and then correct their categories and characterizations on the basis of engagement. Okay. Now, I have for most of my life been subject to being categorized as an egghead or, one of those brains kind of education people. And I still remember, I'm not seeing the person here, I still remember a recent camping trip where the fire that all of us men from New Life were sitting around had gone out. So I got down on my hands and knees and I started blowing on the coals and blew the fire back into life. And I heard this comment from the periphery of, sure didn't see that coming. And I couldn't help but think, okay, I just busted somebody's category or characterization. I'm not sure which of those two it was for me by getting down on my hands and knees and getting a fire that was going out going again. But you know what? That category would never have been changed in that person's mind if we hadn't been close enough and in interaction for who I actually am to come out. Okay, so what would you like to say yes and to what I've just said? You're thinking, yes.
For me personally, sometimes I think traveling and working in many, many different people's homes have exposed me to lots of different opinions and belief systems and so on that have totally changed me.
Okay. And that was a choice that you made through your work, right? You were cleaning, and by cleaning, you just saw lots of different things. Okay, yeah, sure. Great. Somebody else?
Cultural changes are very important, and you don't realize that until you live in a culture. You can travel and see a lot, but when you live rub shoulders and see the whys and wherefores of why they do what they do, you can understand there's a lot of ways to skin a cat.
A lot of ways. Yes, that's true. Sometimes you don't even have to skin the cat. Good. Are you thinking with me? What are you thinking? I want to hear what you're thinking. You have a question? You want to raise a question? Yes, Judy.
Spending time with people, in your camping experience, they probably see you as a teacher or whatever, but when you get down to life and you spend time with people, that's when the truth comes out.
Sure. Our tendency really is to view people not as complex, but as just in whatever way we see them, right? And I think that a Christian frame should mean that we actually practice saying to ourselves about other people, that is a complex person. They are far more than their appearance, right? Other thoughts, comments? We can ignore the whatever's walking on the roof. Yes, Dave.
I have a question about how you see discernment playing into this.
Okay.
Some folks that I respect have been very accurate about patterns and habits that they see in my life, and that required some level of characterization or identifying, I've seen this story before. How would you see that relating to seeing somebody still as very complex, but also knowing where they're at in their life or a situation that they're bringing to you in order to speak lightly?
Yeah, that's a great question. How do we, what's the relationship of discernment to the reality of people's complexity? Well, since we're talking about conversations and dialogue here, my inclination is to say that if you think that you see a pattern, it's at least a starting point to ask, I think I see a pattern. Is this a pattern? What do you think? Rather than saying there is a pattern that you don't see that needs to change, right? Because that feels that's imposing. But if I open the door with a question, now sometimes so in thinking about how I've actually implemented this, there have been a book about managing people talks about the reality that you have situations, and then you have patterns, and then you have ethical considerations. A single situation you just deal with on this just happened. If the same thing is happening repeatedly that was already dealt with, then we ask about the pattern. Help me understand why it is that it appears that you are consistently being late to class. Is there something structural in the way? You don't have a ride to class. And my question, is there something structural in the way, is an attempt to acknowledge that just because the pattern appears to be problematic doesn't mean there aren't legitimate reasons for the pattern. And I think that's giving grace to a person. When something annoys us, it's more likely that we will not be creative in our giving of grace. And that's generally speaking when I want to say that rather than asking the question in my annoyance, I will wait until the annoyance has gone so that doesn't touch tone, it doesn't touch posture, right? I wish I could say that that's a rare feature of my choices, but actually it's fairly frequent that I'm having to say, okay, now's not the time to say anything because I feel annoyed. Okay, so that's a first stab toward an answer. Let's follow up with that, David. Yes, and what abouts?
When I think about discernment or life experience, it helps me maybe understand people better by being able to categorize? How can I use that without leaning on it in a way that minimizes the complexity of something?
Yeah, that's a good question. What do you think? How do we... Okay, so let's just say this. Some people have discernment. Do the people who have discernment know that they have discernment? And how sure should they be about the accuracy of their discernment? Because it seems like I meet people who think they have discernment, but I'm not very impressed with their discernment. So I think there should always be an element of self-doubt, even if you are seeing patterns, seeing long-term consequences to present course that postures the engagement with that tentatively as opposed to definitively. Okay. Now, yes, I agree that having categories is in fact a part of critical thinking. I believe in and value critical thinking. If everything's the same or it's all just gray, then I haven't thought carefully. Okay. But what's the difference between a proper category and a stereotype? Right? Well, a stereotype is a category that then gets applied with all of its components as a broad brush, right? Which is different than me saying, oh, let's see, you are born in Canada and on the right side of the map versus the left side of the map, so maybe it's more likely that you speak French than English. And toward the north rather than the south, and the facts start to provide potential categories. Yeah, that's really important. Are our categories such that it's like that thing that you toss your change into? You toss the penny, the dime, the nickel, the quarter in, and because of the size, it will automatically be slotted into a particular right-sized fit. Well, I think some people have, a set of categories. Let's be generous and say that they've got 50 categories. But if somebody shows up who doesn't fit in the 50 categories, they're going to be fit in one of the 50 categories rather than a 51st category being created for them. Like the guy who looked at me and said, well, related back to Matt's comment, he said, he made a comment that made it clear that he thought that because I was in the camp that he was in, which at that camp would have been a fundamentalist evangelical camp, that would mean that I was a cessationist. That meant which means that I believe that no signs, wonders, miracles, speaking in tongues, or supernatural gifts are operative today. And I said, actually, I'm not a cessationist. 1 Corinthians 14, the last thing Paul says is don't forbid to speak in tongues, so I'm trying to not forbid to speak in tongues. What? How can you possibly? Like, oh. Well, we can talk about that if you want to. Doesn't look like you want to. Cool. Now, thank you for the filtering feedback that has come to me. I'd like to follow up just at this point with something relevant to last session's topic on political conversations, but I think it's relevant to this session as well, and that is, in a discussion forum like this in which we're talking about talking about things, sometimes it can seem like you have an obligation to be a competent conversation partner on every possible topic. Okay, I deny that. We do not have obligations to be competent conversation partners on every possible topic. It's perfectly fine to say, not only do I not know much of anything about that, I don't even have any particular interest in knowing anything about that, so, you know. But we also have to own what follows from that. Well, if I don't know and don't really have interest, then I probably shouldn't have any kind of definitive opinion about the thing that I don't know much about or am not interested in talking about. That's the appropriate humility that comes along with the freedom to choose what it is that we focus on or don't focus on. Make sense? So, yeah, for a long time, there were things that in theology that I knew people had views and I knew there was all kinds of stuff written about it. It just didn't interest me. And when that topic comes up, I sit back and listen rather than participate. And that's true for politics. Do you have to be? Okay, now we have an opinion. Some people think you have an obligation to care. And if you disagree that you don't have an obligation to care, well, that sounds like another opportunity for a conversation about, help me understand why you think that way. Yes, Alan.
I work at the Creation Museum in New York for 15 years. And what you just said, that you have an obligation to listen. I've encountered a lot of people that don't want to listen because it might change their opinion. I find that harder than having a conversation with people that disagree with my opinion.
Sure. So, thank you. There have been times in my life where I knew I'm not mature enough to engage this topic responsibly. I may be emotionally immature because all I feel on this topic is emotional upheaval and reaction. There's fireworks, emotional fireworks going off. Not careful, logical, careful thinking. I think we need to give people room to have a similar recognition about themselves. It's not so much that I'm not willing to learn as I don't think I'm ready to learn at this particular point. Having said that, I'm not pushing back against what you're saying. I just remember, so confession. I was reading John Piper's book, Desiring, suddenly the title's gone. His Christian Hedonism book. What's the main title? Desiring God? Desiring God? Yeah. And his second chapter is a straight-out 5-point Calvinist defense of God foreordains all things. And it upset me so badly. I mean, my heart rate is up. My blood pressure is up. As I'm sitting alone in my room reading these words on the page. And I thought, okay, obviously I'm not ready to engage with this topic at this time. For whatever reason, emotions are way over the top on this. I'm just going to put this aside. And I'll come back to this when I've been able to gain some emotional stability. Now, life doesn't always give us the freedom to put something off like that, but when it does, I think it's appropriate to take it and defer. And maybe when we find that somebody's not willing to listen, if we know that this is a possibility, even if they don't know it about themselves, they don't realize that they're immature and not able to do anything except respond emotionally in the moment, that will help us to extend grace for and pray for their future growth. Right? Now, Alan, you and Charlotte together have this thing about, it says somewhere in the Bible, both of you brought this up, so the reference is Hebrews chapter 2, verse 6. And in that verse, it actually says, somebody says somewhere. I thought, wow, that's about as open-ended example of the Bible says. I'm like, yeah, there it is, Hebrews chapter 2, verse 6, your reference for it's okay to say somebody says somewhere. Okay, we've been doing this. I'm willing to do this. I enjoy this, but be honest, I get a little nervous when the ratio of my talking to your talking gets too high. Serious. So, what is it about this format that you like? And if there's something that you don't like, okay, well that's not this slide. That's a different slide. Okay, exploration of new ideas. Okay, interaction. Okay, I'm trying. Yes.
Can you read those? Because some of us.
Sure, thank you. I'm actually squinting myself. So the first one says the exploration of new ideas. The second one is interaction. The third is you are modeling what we are discussing. The fourth is I enjoy getting to interact with the speaker if I want, but also hearing other thoughts and perspectives from people in the room that I don't know as well personally. I need time to think about the topic while learning from you. You leave plenty of room for questions and don't shut down questions. Well, I'm glad you feel that way because I don't want to shut them down. The relaxed format, collaborative thinking, seeing comfortable conversation around challenging topics in action. It helps learning. Good. Yeah.
In your speaking, maybe I'm seeing wrongly. I'd be interested to hear feedback from whoever. But I think that I'm seeing you offer two tools. The first tool that I saw you offer was curiosity. So yes, maybe curiosity in like coming to and saying, hey Phil, how do you come to that position? But even previous to that, as you worked through, okay, they're from Canada, so like that is curiosity in action. And you don't even have to engage the person to start engaging curiosity.
Okay.
The second tool that I saw you offer was, we would term this self-awareness. but noticing when there's chaos going on inside and saying, okay, bad time to express. Wait until stability and calm returns. And what's going on is, so self-awareness, yes, and also self-regulation.
Okay. Yeah, I wish that I could tell you that I learned those things in a textbook. I actually didn't self-regulate very well early on in my life, and then reaped the consequences of just opening my mouth and wishing that I hadn't done that. Even in marriage, I grew up in a home that was highly verbal. Both partners could articulate their position not only with verbal clarity, but emotional intensity simultaneously. Okay? And my wife grew up in a home where it was not that way at all. So even if I removed the emotional intensity component and in the moment analysis, dialogue, processing, her brain would go flat. Boop. Nothing's happening here. Okay. And since I valued the relationship, like, well, let's figure out a time when the feedback that I know will eventually surface in your mind, because I've watched this happen over time, is you're free to share it. Because I really want that feedback. And so I think along with the two that you've just properly identified, I would add the third, and that is that when we value the other person as a potentially God-given contributor to us, that heightens our use of these other two tools. If we see them as, just another Joe walking down the road that doesn't have anything to do with me, then our tendency is to not be curious. And then if Joe wants to engage with me, just, give it to him straight. Yeah.
So I actually just witnessed you offer a third, that sometimes self-regulation is learned through co-regulation.
So most of us aren't familiar with the term co-regulation, so that's psychological terminology.
This is community. So you talked about your wife's way of being taught you that, like, okay, my normal way of being isn't appropriate. I need to change my way of being.
Can you all help me know how to be comfortable in small talk? Because I am just not comfortable with small talk. There's some co-regulation that needs to go on here that I'm a candidate for improvement on. My mind goes blank. Seriously. Out of all the things that I know and could talk about, you want to do small talk? Zip. All of us have our strengths and weaknesses. And that weaknesses side thing, when we front only our strengths in public and don't front our weaknesses, I think we miss an opportunity for the body to share the giftedness that God has distributed in the body. Okay? So allowing our weaknesses to be seen is an opportunity for our own growth and movement toward Christ-likeness. And I think that is I thank God for a safe environment. Right? If there's no safety, none of us is going to stick our head out and let it get smashed. Right? But a safe framework says, oh, okay, we can actually surface some things that, thank you. Well, our time is up, so Alan gets the last word.
You talk about small talk. I see you standing up there and you talked about being an egghead. I'm sorry, first thing that popped in my mind was you over easy, over hard, or scrambled. That's not what the word said.
Yeah, there's only 3 options.
Standing in front of a format like this, that the leader has to feel like everything they say has to be profound, and it doesn't.
Thank you.
That's why we like this format, is what any of us says doesn't have to be, it may be profound, but it doesn't have to be,
Good.
because we're learning.
Good. Amen. Let's close with prayer. Thank you, Lord, for your Spirit that inhabits each one of us here. Would you enable us to maintain the unity of that your Spirit is generating here in the bond of peace? May our value of each other rise, and may, as a result, our love for one another flourish, and may that be seen by those who look on as evidence of your grace and goodness to us. We pray this for Christ's sake. And everyone said, amen. Blessings.